And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. I have known since first year Latin in the 8th grade that Petra is the word for rock, and for about as long as that St. Peter's Basilica is central headquarters for the Roman Catholic Church. And yet, at first glance, at the information we have from the Gospels, Peter doesn't strike me as the solidest of rocks amongst the community of Jesus' disciples. One of Peter's gifts, though, is that he speaks up. Let's look at Peter in Matthew's account of the good news. Simon, also known as Peter, along with his brother Andrew, were the first to be selected by Jesus as Jesus' followers. Episode 1 presents the sleeping disciples awakened by a storm battering their boat, crying out for help. Jesus appears almost as a ghost, tries to calm them, and Peter asks, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Peter sets off with great success, but down into the water he goes when it seems to him that he's alone. Jesus scolds him for doubting, rescues him, and Peter suddenly becomes the disciples, who flip from very little faith to worshiping Jesus with the words, "Truly, you are the Son of God." In episode 2, Jesus is explaining to the disciples that he will suffer at the hands of the authorities, be killed, and then be raised from the dead. Apparently, disregarding that last part, Peter rebukes Jesus for even entertaining the thought that he will be struck down by anyone, and earns for himself the not too complimentary label of stumbling block. Episode 3 finds Peter on a mountaintop with James and John as they witness Jesus mingling with Moses and Elijah. Peter, the master of inappropriate pronouncements and disturber of mystical moments, suggests that he and James and John build booths for Israel's 3 great prophets, a reference to Sukkot, the holiday which commemorates temporary housing during wilderness times. And perhaps the best-known Peter pronouncement, "Though all become deserters because of you, I will never desert you." Jesus' response, "This very night before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And Peter's final answer, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And our final journey of discovery into Peter's personality features Peter, James, and John, those who had witnessed Jesus' transfiguration on the mountaintop, as they accompany Jesus for moral support to a place called Gethsemane, where they keep falling asleep. Peter's a perfectly fine fellow. The point is not to pick on him, but to say that God chooses any one of us, no matter how flawed or unsuited we think we are for the work God calls us to do. God chooses Abel, who cheats his way to his older brother's birthright. God chooses Moses, who tries to weasel out of his commitment by saying he doesn't speak very well. God chooses a narcissistic Joseph who brags of his accomplishments, totally alienating his brothers. God chooses Jeremiah, who insists he's just a child with little understanding. God chooses David, who sends a man to his death in battle in order to steal his wife. Peter declares, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus' response is, "Flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, but God." A diplomatic way of saying, "Peter, you're not smart enough to come up with that on your own. None of your buddies told you that. You couldn't have figured it out without God letting you in on it." God chooses whomever God wants to speak the truth. It is up to us to listen, even to the most annoying person among us who, when he speaks, the entire room of folks roll their eyes. Not again. Will someone please tell him to sit down and be quiet? God chooses even the least significant among us, the least popular, to communicate God's will. But there is a catch. We are well advised to remember that flesh and blood does not reveal truth to any of us humans. Our minds are limited. God's mind is limitless. We come to a point in our search for knowledge and perfection when windows and doors slam shut. Mathematical theorems, scientific givens, medical discoveries, musical masterpieces, magnificent paintings and sculptures, brilliant speeches, superhuman athletic accomplishments, technological advances, archaeological and historic finds, literary genius, all are God-given. Those of us who truly believe we can accomplish any of these things without God's holy interference are destined to drown in torrential waters that overwhelm us, to be a stumbling block to ourselves, to everyone around us, and to the unfolding of God's kingdom. And, most frightening of all, we are destined to be utterly alone and abandoned. I believe what we popularly call the muse is in reality God playing with our minds, God interfering to help us connect the dots. Do not be conformed to this world, Paul says, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what are the dreams of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given us. Farmers, mathematicians, scientists, doctors, musicians, bakers, chefs, visual artists, historians, poets, playwrights, political leaders, motivating orators, husbands, wives, grandparents. Whatever vocation we are suited for, whatever dreams we dream, have been gifted to us by God. And there is nothing of any worth we are able to do without God having given us the ability to do it. God, grant that we may come together as a church, make your love known throughout the world, and use the gifts you have given all of us, the strong and mighty, the weak and forgotten, to your glory and the welfare of your creation.